Vice Chair Marone and Councilman Madden for their work on it. Like I said, I do expect, we're talking about some of the smaller details now involved with the report, and, maybe we can still do some work on that, but as a whole, I think that, I very much like what the committee's done and is recommending. I think it introduces some new ideas, for us to move forward with, but also looks and see, and again, I was hoping for the board members and council to study the things that we have done, and, we've come to some conclusions, to continue those things. Delaware County's meetings, have always had the same structure of the Tuesday meetings and Wednesday meetings. We do that weekly, and again, we do it, I think if you compare us to other counties, which seems to be, I don't know if that's the standard to look at, but if you want to compare us to other counties, we meet twice as much as any other county around that I'm aware of. We have weekly meetings that include both the agenda meeting, deliberative meeting, or discussion meeting, and the regular council meeting. Our agendas are posted always the day before the meetings, which again is not always the case for what I've seen in other counties. Our meetings, like I said, our Tuesday meetings, not all counties even have an agenda or deliberative meeting. So from that standpoint, I think that our meetings have exceeded what other counties have done for the most part. I'd like to take a look and see what other counties do. When we talk about some other counties call their agenda meeting the sunshine meeting, and see what they do in terms of videotaping those. And also, I think I would like it more formed in terms of what the standards would be for the videotaping and where are we putting that, in what formats to make sure everybody is accessible to it. Like for instance, if skip the social media part of it, but make sure it does work, is accessible, and is able to go onto our website. With that, I guess, like I said, I think that what I envisioned doing was asking the council to accept and move to begin to implement those things that are recommended there. And we can do that both from a technological standpoint and ask Mr. Madron to, incorporate our new methods and procedures in our administrative code for, so that it's documented in writing, so we know what we're doing.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to add a degree of timeliness to that. We spoke about the two things that we're talking about implementing: video recording and changing when the preliminary agenda goes out. Neither of which, well, particularly on the preliminary agenda, there were no structural difficulties in getting that done ASAP. So,
just speaking for myself, I have no personal objections to listing the agenda on Monday evening, if that's what we're talking about.
We are, and I think also with regard to the Tuesday video recording, if we can accomplish it for Wednesday, I see no reason why we can't accomplish it for Tuesday.
Again, why don't we move forward to both implement this on the technological side and have Mr. Madden write it up, and we can then make that decision.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a hard time accepting the idea that we're going to be meeting on Tuesdays with no public record of what gets discussed. And as Mr. Zidek said,
let me say this.
If I could just finish my point. I would have a hard time really making any comment on Tuesdays if it's not going to be on the record. I think what we're going to be having is that I'm going to refrain from asking questions that really could be more effectively asked on Tuesday. I'm just going to reserve them for Wednesday when there's a record. And that's just not, this has become very cumbersome going through the exercise we did this morning with regard to the minutes. Let's just have these on video records so that there's not the same sort of cumbersomeness.
And I'm not necessarily against that. I'm talking about how we implement it. You've come to this, but you presented problems, but you really haven't presented a solution about how we're actually going to do that. Who's going to do it, what's going to be done, how it's going to be done, what format it will be in, what feed it will be. It's great to present ideas, but then you actually have to implement these ideas. And I'm saying we want to move with it quickly to do that. I just, I don't have that in front of me today. And, once again, I just want to clarify one thing when you talk about there's no record of the Tuesday meeting. Again, what the Sunshine Law and Robert's Rules of Order talks about when we do these is that there are not minutes of the agenda meeting, and that's not because we're not following any law. The agenda meeting is the deliberation meeting where we do discuss these things. We don't take any action at that meeting. And once again, I would encourage you to look at the Sunshine Law, look and see what other municipalities do, what other counties do as it relates to that meeting. Whether it's just a misunderstanding on your part or just an unfamiliarity with there's not minutes of the deliberative or workshop meeting that typically takes place. We want to be as open as possible, and we've welcomed all the discussion and questions on both Tuesday and Wednesday that you want to have. And if you want something, that somebody says to be reflected in minutes, certainly you may ask for that on Wednesday. And I think that all this will continue to work out. You're presenting a report to us this morning. I saw a draft of this, for the first time, I think, yesterday. I think we are moving, I think we all are of the same mind. We just want to move it and implement it in the right way.
Mr. Chairman, I may not be familiar with what's gone on over the years with county council, but I am very familiar with the idea of transparency. And if there is a meeting that, in the mindset of transparency, can be provided in a public format, regardless of what the bare minimum is that Robert's Rules and the Sunshine Act ask for, it certainly falls short of what my view would be on transparency that we can accomplish. And so, I would be comfortable with the proposal saying that, stating as soon as practical, we have both Tuesdays and Wednesdays meetings video recorded. I would be comfortable with that. I understand that there are logistical hurdles that we did not specifically lay out, but they're not rocket science. These meetings in Media Borough, in Upper Darby, in various boroughs throughout the county, they've found a way to video record meetings. This isn't rocket science. So I do really think that putting some degree of wiggle room by saying as soon as possible, or something to that effect, I'd be comfortable with, but I really want it to be about Tuesdays and Wednesdays meetings, because Tuesdays meeting, to me, is just as vital to be on record as Wednesdays.
And again, I say something, I don't want any wiggle room regarding any procurement policies or anything violated during this whole procedure. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kaufman, and certainly neither do I, neither does Mr. Matt, neither does anybody up here. Nobody is suggesting to have any wiggle room in violation of any procurement procedure. I think that we should feel free today to vote, and for those of us who don't want to record Tuesday's meetings, they should vote nay. And for those of us who do want to record Tuesdays and Wednesdays meetings, they will give us the opportunity to vote yay. And if people are opposed to it, obviously we're of free will and we can object to it. But we quite often in the entire history of my being on county council, we have invited people to bid and things of that nature. And we could proceed accordingly here. We could easily, it seems to me, move for the recording of meetings on Wednesdays and Tuesdays, and also move to solicit bids to obtain a vendor to do so for us.
I second that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to table the matter for discussion with our solicitor and executive director. I mean, I'm just getting this report yesterday, and now I would just make a motion to table.
Well, a motion to table takes precedence over any, I'm not sure whether there was an existing motion, but there's a motion to table the committee report on meetings. Is there a second to that?
I'll second.
There's a second to that. All in favor? Is there any discussion on the motion?
Like I said, I'd like to better understand Councilman Culp's reasoning for tabling this, just so I make sure I can vote in an informed manner.
My reasoning is I'd like to speak with the executive director and our solicitor to discuss what's in here and make sure that we're following the proper requirements. I don't think anyone up here is saying we're not going to be transparent, but I would like the opportunity to discuss that with our personnel before voting on it.
Would you like that opportunity right now? I mean, we have been talking with our executive director and our,
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to speak with her since getting this, and I would like to do that, but I'm not going to be rushed here and do it now. So,
in this meeting, I heard nothing in terms of a reason why we can't say video recordings will take place for Tuesdays and Wednesdays meeting. I'm not suggesting that we say, we put a time frame on it that it has to happen next week, but this is pretty simple. I don't see any reason to table this. I mean, this is kicking this further along. It's been kicked on for however long county council meetings have taken place, and that there's been the technological capability of video recording them.
Is there any further discussion?
Not on my part.
I'll just offer that, last week, there was an agenda item where I believe Mr. Madden wanted some additional time to consider it, to find out more information, and, asked to table that matter for, suggested we table it for a week, and, council did grant that consideration. So if members of council, again, we're just receiving this report, I don't think there's anything untimely if we have council members give them the opportunity to consider it before voting on things that are contained in it for a week. So I would say I would support tabling it for a 1 week period until next week, where council members can further consider.
I'd like the record to show that the proposal was provided on Monday. It's been 2 days, and it's a 2-page proposal. There's been 48 hours to follow up with whoever felt needed to further understand what was in there, which is 2 basic changes that can be done by a middle school child. To be very frank, I mean, we're not saying this needs to be the mint perfect technological implementation of a video recording. We're saying that some form of video recording should take place as promptly as possible.
and Bing calls out.
I'm not calling anyone. This is generic.
Refrain, look, we've been giving everybody a very wide berth to ask whatever questions and receive whatever information they have wanted, from him. I've asked everybody, don't disparage anybody. If you think it's a simple decision, again, you worked on the issue, you and Ms. Moreau worked on the issue, you presented it to us. We had on the agenda the presentation. I asked to be added on the presentation of this report to council today. If members of council wish to take it into consideration and come back next week and make a decision, I would, I personally would vote to approve that same request as I did last week when you had a question about something that, again, perhaps I thought it was a rather simplistic item that we had on there, but you wanted more information to determine about. This is something that's you're just bringing to us. I think as we start off our relationships here on council, that we ought to provide everybody the opportunity to consider anything that's brought up and not give it the so-called bum's rush of wanting it to get done when I want it, as I want it. So is there any further discussion on the motion to table?
I appreciate your statements, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate the fact that you had this proposal for the committee to look into these important issues. I want to be very clear, I'm not name-calling anyone. What I'm discussing is the simplicity of the actions that would be required, particularly when we're not stating a particular threshold of technological needs or a specific time frame. So to be very clear, I don't want anyone to feel that they were disparaged by my comments. What my statement is that anyone in this room with an unspecific time frame set and an unspecific technological level of implementation could accomplish a video recording of a meeting that has a smartphone in their hand.
Undeniable.
Thank you, sir.
Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion to table say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
So Motion to table carries by a vote of 3 to 2. I believe that brings us up to item number 15 on the agenda. Ms. Morano?
Move for a request by the Controller's Office for payment of current bills.
Is there a motion and there's a second? Is there any discussion on the motion?
I had a few questions. Ms. Phillips, there were two payments in the hundreds of pages that I went through that I took interest in. One was a payment of $15,679 going to a company called CM3. And the second was a payment of $27,000 going to a company called Traffic Planning. I don't imagine that you, as you sit here, Ms. Phillips, have an understanding necessarily of what those contracts are. But I would note for the record that these two entities had individuals who made significant contributions during the last election cycle. And so I would like to better understand what these contracts are and to review with you the RFP process that was that went along with the granting of those contracts.
I'll just comment that those invoices are on the check request for today and are being processed in accordance with the procedure in place for the Controller's Office. So I can say that all documentation necessary to have a check issued has gone through the departments and through my office. I'm not personally familiar with those contracts. We can get you copies of things. The RFP process would not be necessarily my office. However, I can give you the backup documentation for the payment request. So we can get you information on that. As any council person, if they have an interest, we can get that.
I appreciate that, and I'm not suggesting, to be clear, that we not make payments, but rather just, I'd like to better understand what the contracts are. So perhaps if you could start with giving me copies of those contracts, and then I could sort out for myself how they came to be.
We can do that.
Any other discussion? Just to be clear though, Ms. Phillips, you're presenting that, the current bills list requesting we pay that today?
Yes.
Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Madry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This week, I'm requesting council's authorization to file one consent to adoption with the ordinance court.
Thank you, Mr. Madron. Move for the approval to file one consent for adoption with the ordinance court.
Second motion.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. I'd like council to consider one other item that was not on our agenda yesterday, but I believe it was on the issues that were discussed previously, and it just is my omission yesterday. I put it on, and that would be the appointment of a commissioner from Delaware County to the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. This is the multi-region planning board that I believe there are 9 counties, as well as the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the state of New Jersey participate in to review projects, make certain planning decisions and recommendations, especially regarding Pennsylvania Department of Transportation projects. I talked to members of council. I've been proud to serve as our commissioner for the last several years. I did speak with Mr. Madden, and based upon his background, he indicated that he had an interest in this, and I certainly encouraged that interest. So I would welcome if someone would make a motion. Ms. Rome, you want to make a motion to appoint Mr. Madden as Delaware County's representative to the DVRPC.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I motion that we move to appoint Kevin Madden to as the Delaware County representative of the DVRPC, Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Zidek. Is there any discussion on the motion?
I don't think I ever got your resume. I'm just kidding.
Mr. Chairman.
You said it your way, Mr.
Mr. Chairman, because this wasn't on the agenda yesterday, it would be appropriate for you to accept any public comment on this
Yes.
motion as well.
Yes, we'll do that. Is there any further council comment or discussion on the motion? As Mr. Madden indicated, we did not have this on yesterday's agenda, so anybody from the public that has any comment on it or discussion, please step forward to the microphone and just give us your name and address. All right, hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Congratulations, Mr. Madden. You have a meeting tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Now is the time in our meeting for public comment, so anybody that wishes to address council with any questions, concerns, or compliments, please step forward to the microphone and just tell us your name and address.
Hi, Eve Miari, 407 Meeting House Lane in Media. I was here at the agenda meeting yesterday. There were about 15 members of the public who spoke about their concerns with regard to the Mariner Pipeline. I understand from the discussion today that that conversation, public comments were off the record. So I just want to make sure that I understand the action that the council proposed to take. My understanding is that the chairman and Mr. Zidek have formed a committee that will explore potential scope for this project, and that there would be a vote on that next Wednesday. Is that correct?
I think that's the plan.
Did I get that right? Okay. And so if I may, for a moment, I just wanted to speak with regard to citizens' concerns about the risk assessment and the scope of the project. As you can imagine, there have been extensive conversations within the citizens groups with regard to what people want. And I recall, Mr. Chairman, your comments yesterday about a study that was done in another township, in West Goshen Township, and why was that not acceptable? What is it that people are looking for that's different? So I just wanted to speak to that briefly, if I may. I think
I'm sorry to stop you. I don't think I said that was not acceptable.
not to you, but why wasn't that okay why wasn't that enough for the residents? I may have
Did your recollection, I'm not sure I was arguing that ought to be good enough. I pointed out I had reviewed that.
Yeah, I don't think you were. My understanding was you were questioning, wanting to make sure that we did something here, that you did something here that, that residents were going to accept, that everyone would accept. And clearly a study was done there and people are still asking for a study. So obviously there's a difference between that study and what we're asking for. The study that residents are interested in, by my understanding of having spoken extensively with residents, is that the study would be an independent and unbiased vendor. That the vendor would be an engineering firm that works extensively on these types of risk analysis projects, but one who has not worked directly in the past or currently with the operator, Sunoco or ETP. So this is different than some of the other efforts that have been made within the county to address this issue. I believe there's been extensive discussion within Delaware County Emergency Services. Delaware County Emergency Services, that there's been a tabletop exercise, that there have been attempts to sort of address the emergency preparedness and response issues. And what we're saying is, that's great. We want to be able to address emergency preparedness and response, but we can't do that until we adequately understand the risk. So we are interested specifically in a study that looks at both consequence, what the worst case scenarios might be, and also probability, taking into account probability across the industry, but also with regard to this particular operator that has the most egregious record with regards to leaks and spills. And that's very different from the study that was undertaken in West Goshen Township. That study looked at the extent to which Sunoco was meeting or exceeding industry standards. So it's a little bit different from what we're talking about. That was a study, but not a risk analysis. Specific things that members of the public are interested in understanding is, what is the blast zone on this pipeline in certain circumstances? How many people in Delaware County live, go to work, or attend school in the blast zone? That the risk assessment should ask questions such as, what is the acceptable level of risk? And does this project exceed the acceptable level of risk? Is it possible to mitigate that level of risk and how. And the final thing that I would ask is that as you continue your discussions with regard to how to do this, that you remain open to community feedback and involvement in some degree, even if it's simply conversations or having a meeting to gain additional input from residents. I think most importantly, the prior study that we have out of Middletown Coalition for Community Safety establishes a blast zone approximately 1,800 feet or up to 1,800 feet. And that is actually confirmed in real time by an accident that occurred in Folensby, West Virginia, where a pipeline of the same size, pressure, and material exploded and had thermal impacts out to 2,000 feet. So I think the most important thing is that we want to ensure that as we're looking at emergency preparedness and planning, that we're also really asking the question, is it possible to mitigate this risk? Because we don't want the only answer to be, essentially how we go in and deal with a catastrophe after it's occurred. I think the real essence of the question has to be, how do we mitigate that? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes?
Had a tough time getting one way.
Okay.
Jack, why don't you just grab the mic? I'm sorry.
Thank you. Oh, I didn't realize.
You have something serious to say? Okay. So my mommy, right here, is talking about the pipeline. And I think instead of filling the pipeline with gas, if it explodes, we should just fill it with chocolate milk. Because the green chocolate milk is what's dangerous. Right?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. My name is John Gallagher of 1002 Twickenham Road, Media. I heard the report or minutes of last week's council meeting. I want to commend the county council for having a sexual harassment policy. I think that's a very important thing to have. I would like to urge one thing for your consideration, and that is this. Although sexual harassment operates both ways against or for male and female, as a practical matter, all victims of sexual harassment are female and all perpetrators of sexual harassment are male. And for that reason, I urge the county council to adopt a procedure which our office adopted 28 years ago, right after the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas hearings, and that is to name as your sexual harassment ombudsman or human relations person in charge of sexual harassment, whatever title you want to give that person, a female, not a male. And furthermore, that you name such a female as is not perceived by the county employees as having any kind of political drag or power that would discourage employees from coming forward with complaints for fear of possible retaliation. That person will have much greater credibility with the EEOC or the HRC in case that person has to go in front of those agencies to defend the county's position on a particular circumstance. I have other ideas on this subject, but they have to do with changing state law, which is beyond the purview of this body. So I'll keep them to myself for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Good morning, sir.
Hi, my name is Seth Kovnat. I'm actually a resident of Montgomery County right now, but I lived in Middletown Township up until recently.
We'll be flexible and allow you to speak here.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I'm actually the one who commissioned the Middletown Coalition hazard study, and I just wanted to make some recommendations in terms of, when you're designing the scope of your risk assessment. There are a lot of reasons why taking the route that they did is bad for these materials. One of them is that there are a lot of people, obviously, but Another reason is because of the presence of sewer systems and open air underground areas where if there is a leak, the gas can enter those areas and spread out, through them, and they will not dissipate. So, so what I would suggest is that as you look at the quantification of the hazards, you factor in those types of ideas. The fact that there are valve stations that are literally in people's neighborhoods, and by Glenwood Elementary School, among other schools. Any risk assessor will tell you, and I've talked to several, that the likelihood of a leak at an above ground feature of a pipeline is much greater than an underground section. So accounting for the likelihood, we have to account for the fact that these features are just as close to people and residents and businesses and schools as any underground features that are part of the pipeline. And so the other thing is we have to account for the fact that these highly volatile liquids, which return to a gaseous state after they're released, are much more likely to leak, as evidenced by past leak data from PHMSA, than typical liquids pipelines, like oil or gasoline or jet fuel. And the reason is because they are highly volatile. They're actually liquid. They're like a two-phase flow, liquid and gas, in the pipeline because it's flowing. There's a big difference between a static tank and a flow.